All right, we're on the record. Mr. Nelson?
Your Honor, the defense will exercise a peremptory.
All right, juror number 111 is excused as a defense peremptory. And we'll move to, I think, is it 113? Here's our last juror of the day. So, oh, and at the end of the day, let's do a chambers conference and remind me about to discuss the last jurors. All right, welcome back. Well, it turns out you're going to be able to take your capstone course after all. We're going to release you from this jury, so let you go back and get rolling on that rhetoric capstone, and the best of luck to you.
Thank you so much. Well.
And what number was that for the defense?
That's number 13.
Number 13. Okay, this is juror 113. Okay, come on up. You have a seat right here next to me. All right, good afternoon. You are juror 113, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Couple things before I turn the questioning over to the attorneys. I have to swear you in so that all your answers are under oath, so if you could raise your right hand. Okay. Do you swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
Yes.
All right, thank you. You're perfect, I think, on your positioning with the mic. But just to let you know, we have plexiglass in front of the attorneys and in front of you, and they're pretty far away. There's plexiglass between us, and I'm going to keep my mask on. My point being, you can take your mask off if it's more comfortable for you, or if you just think you can speak more clearly. But I'll leave it totally up to you.
Okay, thank you.
Mask or no mask, I'd like you to stay fairly close to the microphone. Actually, where you're at should work, but we'll adjust as necessary. First of all, you filled out a questionnaire. Thank you for doing that. Was everything on that questionnaire true?
Yes. One thing has changed, though.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, the being victim of the crime.
Okay.
And yeah, I was carjacked on February 11th, and I didn't get a chance to change that on there.
Okay, did you say carjacked?
Yeah.
Okay. So February 11th, obviously, that was after you submitted this questionnaire.
Yeah.
And where did that occur?
St. Paul, next to McAllister College.
Okay. Do you think you could sit on a criminal case with that so recent in your memory?
I think so.
Okay, no problem with that? All right. I'm glad you were able to volunteer that because, it's been a couple months since you filled out the questionnaire.
Yeah.
And so if anything has changed or you have to make additions, or even if you realize that something you wrote in there was inaccurate, or you've got an opinion that you wanted to change because maybe you evolved in your decision, I want you to feel comfortable offering that information. Even if it's completely different from what's in your questionnaire.
Okay.
All right?
Yep.
It's all a snapshot in time as far as we're concerned.
All right. Thank you.
You weren't supposed to read any articles or pay attention to any media coverage of this case or any related cases. But we understand that between when you filled out the questionnaire several months ago and today, you may have been inadvertently exposed to some news about this case or related cases.
Yeah.
Has that happened to you? Have you learned any new information about this case?
Not really. No. Nothing.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Sorry. No, I have not.
All right. How about related cases? Like civil cases or?
I don't think so. Other than the one, the carjacking, but
Okay.
other than that, no.
Okay. I'm going to have you move just a little closer, if you could. And I'll turn this up as well. Okay. So no other information about this case since you filled out the questionnaire?
Correct.
All right. Oh, that's perfect. All right. The important thing to understand is whether it was information you found out about before you filled out the questionnaire or after you filled out the questionnaire, you have to put it aside. And also any opinions you might have formed. It's okay to have an opinion. That's all right. But you have to put that aside as well and decide this case just on what you hear in the courtroom based on the instructions I give you. Can you
Okay.
do that?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to need you to speak up a little more because the court reporter is a little bit from you.
Okay,
And she
yeah.
needs to hear you more than anybody.
All right. Sorry about that.
No problem. Did you recognize any witnesses on the list that you were given?
No.
Okay. Now, we anticipate that this trial would be about 4 weeks long, starting on March 29th. Can you make that work for your personal life?
Yes.
Any problems, any hardships that we should be aware of that would cause?
No.
Okay. Unless you have any questions for me, I'm going to turn you over to the attorneys.
All right.
Mr. Nelson, you may inquire as to juror number 113.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for your patience and time today and for taking the time to fill out the questionnaire. I'm going to just ask you a few questions generally to get to know you a little bit better, and then I'll ask you some follow-ups on your questionnaire, okay?
Okay.
I'm not going to try to trick you. I'll read you what you wrote. I'll read you the question because I know it's been a while since you have filled it out, all right?
Right.
So before we do that, I just want to ask, and I'm sorry to hear about, you said that you were carjacked.
Yeah. No worries.
I'm sorry?
Well, I said no worries, but yeah, it's okay.
Was that frightening?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say.
Okay. Do you know were any arrests made?
I'm not entirely sure. I know that I did get my car back and a decent amount of the items in my car, but I did not hear of any arrests made. No.
Okay. When that happened, did you call the police?
Yes.
Okay. And did they respond?
Yes.
Were you satisfied with how they treated you in that situation?
Yes.
Okay. Do you feel they acted professionally as they could in that situation?
Yes.
And you obviously have not been informed as to whether anyone is being prosecuted or whatnot.
Right.
Is there anything about that situation that would bias your opinion about the police or how they handled that situation?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. So if you and I were to meet under different circumstances and we were engaged in conversation, what are a couple things I'd learn about you in that first conversation?
I like to play, well, just like about me in general.
Yeah.
I like to play guitar.
Okay.
I have a dog and Blitz, and I DoorDash sometimes.
Okay. That's how you make money now?
Yeah.
All right. You've obviously heard about this case before you were asked to fill out this questionnaire, right?
Yes.
And when you learned that you were a potential juror in this particular case, how did you feel?
I mean, surprised, I guess, but I guess all right with it. Like, I felt like I could do an all right job with it.
Okay. Were you concerned like about your physical safety, your family's safety, COVID-19? Did you have any concerns about any of that?
No, I wouldn't say so.
Okay. When you came downtown today and you saw the government center and all the army and all of that stuff, how did that make you feel?
Decent. I guess surprising for like a second, but after that, fine.
Okay. Why would it have been surprising?
I guess I just didn't expect to be brought in by so many armed men, I guess, but
Okay.
yeah.
But in terms of your personal safety, you
Yeah.
obviously felt secure?
Yes.
All right. And at some point, it's possible when the judge deems it to be safe that your name, if you're a juror on this case, would be released. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Are you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. no concerns about, again, harassment or safety.
Correct.
Okay. Can you tell me about a situation in your life, or think about a situation in your life where you were asked to resolve a conflict between two people?
Not off the top of my head. No.
Okay. You understand, ultimately, if you were a juror in this case and you were deliberating, you're trying to resolve a conflict between the state of Minnesota and Mr. Chauvin. You understand that?
Yes.
And within the jury room, there would be 11 other people, and you would be potentially faced with resolving conflict or involved in conflict,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So how would you imagine approaching, you've got two groups of jurors, they're disagreeing. How do you try to resolve that conflict?
Probably first get people on the same page with anything that they can agree on, and then branch out to the things that they disagree on and see if they can find some kind of middle ground. Go from there.
Okay.
Sure.
If you were to find yourself involved in the conflict, as you were disagreeing with another juror about something, how do you think you approach it differently?
Try to listen to their side of things. Try to take into account everything that they're saying and the points that they're making, and then hopefully get the same from them.
Okay. Do you think that, or have you ever had to try to figure out if someone is lying about something before?
Other than just like family stuff growing up, no. I don't
Okay.
think so.
Well, can you imagine a situation where two people are observing the same incident and they may see it from very different perspectives?
Yes.
What are the types of things that you think would cause someone to see the same incident differently?
I guess ways that they were brought up or grew up. Yeah.
Do you think their personal, their personal experiences or the way they were brought up may be one thing?
Yeah.
What about their education or experiences?
Yeah, that too.
Okay. Do you think it's possible for two people with similar education and backgrounds to still even see something differently?
Yes, I'd say so.
And how would you, let's say you have two people, they've got a very similar background, they have the same training and education, and they disagree. How do you determine which one to assign more credibility to?
I'm not sure, honestly.
Okay. Do you think that if you were in the jury room, you would be the type of person who would agree with someone just to kind of get this over with,
No.
versus like, I believe this to be true, I'm going to stand my ground?
No. I would, the second one.
The
I would
second,
stand my
stand
ground.
your ground?
Yeah.
Ultimately, your job as a juror is to listen to all of the evidence in the case, and kind of like you said, listen to everything, both sides, so to speak, and weigh that evidence, only the evidence from court. Can you do that?
Yes.
And ultimately, the judge is going to give you a list of the rules of law to apply. And you may read those rules of law and you may say, or think in your mind, this can't possibly be the law, or we need to change this law, this is ridiculous. Can you apply the law as the judge gives it to you, even if you disagree with it or think it should be changed?
Yes.
Why?
Because if it's what's given to me from the official judge, then, and it's regarding the specific case, then that's what I have to deal with
Okay.
and go off of.
Good. So I'm going to follow up with some questions from your questionnaire, and I want to just briefly go and ask you one question. There is a question in the questionnaire that asks you about a video that you've seen. and you said you've seen this video 4 to 5 times. I want to make sure we're talking about the same video.
Yeah.
You understand there was a video, a bystander took a video, that video became a viral video, became news, and kind of went around the world, right?
Yeah.
There's that video, and then after that, there were some body-worn cameras from the police officers that were released. There were some surveillance videos from local businesses that were released. So which video or videos have you seen?
I believe only the bystanders one
Okay.
video.
And when you say that you've seen it 4 to 5 times, have you watched it in its entirety, or have you watched just bits and pieces of it?
I believe only bits and pieces of it
Okay.
online.
Online?
Yeah.
So like on news stories online?
Instagram, I guess,
Okay.
and some news stories too.
So kind of scrolling through Instagram and you see a headline and the video starts playing and you watch parts of it?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know, maybe show my age here, but much about Instagram. Is Instagram, like, is it limited in how long the videos are?
I believe to a minute, yes.
To a minute?
I think. It might have changed recently, but that's
Okay.
what I know.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But you've never gone on the internet, looked up like a longer, X number of minutes video, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then other than like through Instagram or social media, have you seen bits and pieces like on the TV news or still frames in the paper or anything like that?
Possibly on the TV, but not watching it myself, just going downstairs with my parents or by the TV and watching it, and I catch a glimpse at it, I guess.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. I think we're pretty much talking about the same video.
Yeah.
So you were asked about you were asked to kind of write a paragraph about what you remember about this incident, and I just want to read what you wrote, if I can, and ask you some follow-ups. You wrote, George Floyd was apprehended after potentially using a counterfeit $20 bill. Derek Chauvin then brought George Floyd to the ground and firmly pushed his knee into George Floyd's neck, killing him. While this happened, Tutau, Alexander King, and T. Lane stood by in uniform, ignoring any pleas for help, and let Mr. Floyd die in broad daylight. That's what you wrote.
Yeah.
So let me just ask you, and it's perfectly okay, right? I mean, we all have our opinions about everything, right?
Yeah.
And it's your opinion is your opinion, and it is just as valid as my opinion or the next guy's opinion.
Yeah.
But what we need to know is, can you take what you have, the opinions that you formed or the ideas that you may have, set them aside, right? And apply, listen only to the evidence in this case. That's
Yes.
what we ultimately need to know, right?
Yes.
So you use the word that Mr. Chauvin firmly pushed his knee into George Floyd's neck, killing him. And so you were of the impression that the cause of death of Mr. Floyd was from Mr. Chauvin.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And ultimately, that's a question that has to be answered by the jury. What was Mr. Floyd's cause of death, right? Do you think that, again, based on everything you've seen and everything you know or everything you've heard, can you set that aside, presume Mr. Chauvin innocent, first and foremost, and then hold the state to its burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt?
I think so. I feel like there might be some difficulty with that, just I guess because of, I don't know, my brain really, but I'd like to say yes, but yeah.
Okay. Well, let me ask it a slightly different way, all right? Under our system of law, you are supposed to start at 0, and the state has to move forward and convince you of what was the cause of Mr. Floyd's death.
Yes.
That's what the presumption of innocence and proof beyond a reasonable doubt generally stand for.
Yeah.
Mr. Chauvin doesn't have to testify. Mr. Chauvin doesn't have to present any evidence. Mr. Chauvin doesn't have to ask a single question during this trial. We don't have to convince you and then to get you back to that starting point. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the question is, would we be required to convince you of something to get you back to the point of the presumption of innocence?
No.
Okay, so you can start from 0
Yes.
and hold the state to its burden.
Yes.
You were asked about your opinion or general impression of Mr. Chauvin, and you wrote that it was somewhat negative. I understand this questionnaire was generally applied to the 4 officers involved.
Yeah.
And what you wrote is, because of how they acted in the situation presented, neglecting to keep others safe, though that is all I know of them. So you formed an impression of Mr. Chauvin, right? And that impression was somewhat negative, and it was based on what you saw in the video as to how they acted. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
You obviously don't know much else about anything about them personally or their training or anything. Agreed?
Yes.
Again, it's okay to have an opinion, an impression, but again, can you set that impression aside? And can you start from 0?
Yes.
You were asked about whether you had ever talked about Mr. Floyd's death with your family, friends, coworkers, or discussed it online. And you checked the box yes, so let me break that down. Did you ever share any opinions online or on any social media platform?
No.
Okay. But you've had conversations with friends and family members about the case?
Yes.
And what you wrote is, I have expressed that I'm aware of the prejudices that have lasted for such a long time, and it saddens me to see another probable instance of such irrational violence. Can you explain, what do you mean by irrational, a probable instance of irrational violence?
I guess I mean that it's possibly another, well, I don't know, I guess since I don't know for sure, but from what I could tell, it's just another, well, not just another, but it's another instance of, I guess, like I said, irrational violence where it didn't need to happen that way, and it didn't need to be violent really at all, but it went that way.
Okay. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
Yeah.
what I think I hear you say is that when you say another instance, you're referring to the death of black men at the hands of police,
Yes.
and irrational violence, meaning that, again, you don't see a justification for the use of force in this case.
Yes.
All right. Again, that you would agree that the video you've seen is one small piece of evidence, right?
Yes.
And did you ever see anything that happened before or after that minute-long clip you saw?
I did not see anything else, no.
So are you the type of person who's willing to re-examine his own perspectives?
Yes.
And would you be willing to listen to evidence that may suggest contrary to the opinion you've expressed here?
Yes.
You were asked whether you believe your community has been negatively or positively affected by any of the protests that have happened since Mr. Floyd's death. And you wrote, I believe it has been affected negatively by so much unrest, though I do see it as a catalyst for a change for the better. What do you mean by that? What is the change, and what is the, how does the unrest negatively affect the community?
I'd say the change would be, I guess, just a more peaceful society overall, where these kinds of things don't happen, at least as much, but preferably just not happen. And by the unrest, I guess I mean there's just so many people with so many different opinions that there's bound to be, I don't know, I guess just social damage done, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There was a page in the questionnaire that asked you to rank your opinions about some broad social statements. And do you remember that exercise generally?
Yes.
Okay. Again, I know you don't remember everything that was written, but I want to just ask you to explain your thinking. You wrote, or the statement reads, police in this country do not treat whites and blacks equally, and you strongly disagreed with that notion. What do you base your strong disagreement on?
Cases similar to this one, really, and
Okay.
the history of that.
So you're familiar with other in custody deaths or deaths involved law enforcement, and you're comparing this case to the others. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I'd say so.
Okay. The statement reads, "I support defunding the Minneapolis Police Department," and you somewhat agreed with that. Why?
Because I don't believe that completely just defunding it would really do any good. In fact, that could just do a lot more damage than any good, but I guess a reallocation of funding to more supportive kinds of things, like, I don't know, like sending out people who can deal with specific situations to help specific people that need help, instead of sending whoever's available to whatever place, really.
Okay. The statement reads, "Local police departments try to cover up excessive force rather than correct it," and you strongly agreed with that. What again do you base your opinion on there?
I think that one's mostly this case.
Okay. So you felt like officers or the police department, or the Minneapolis Police Department, tried to cover this instance up?
Somewhat, I'd say.
Okay. You understand that, police officers, including police officers from the Minneapolis Police Department, may testify in this case.
Yes.
Right? And that they would be potentially testifying against Mr. Chauvin. Do you understand that?
Yes.
So I guess the question becomes, why do you think the Minneapolis Police Department tried to cover this up?
I wouldn't say the entirety of the department would have tried to, but if anybody had, it's trying to avoid some sort of, further conflict, or avoid people realizing what's going on, really.
Okay. So let me ask you this. If police officers were to testify in this case, right, and they were to testify against Mr. Chauvin, do you think that their testimony would be altered based upon the fact that Mr. Chauvin is a former police officer?
I would hope not. I think there's a chance, but less likely than, I guess, than it would seem.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, and now what about police officers who may come in and testify at the defense request, at Mr. Chauvin's request? Do you believe that those officers would be intentionally trying to cover something up?
Yes.
All right. So again, we have this concept of the presumption of innocence, right?
Yes.
And so can you hold all witnesses equally to the same standard?
Yes. Right.
I mean, but you kind of just said you
Yeah.
couldn't, because if officers testify for Mr. Chauvin, they would be more likely to be covering it up. So you would you'd have a tendency to disbelieve their testimony.
I would have difficulty believing that, definitely, but I would like to think that I would believe anything that they say, or
Okay.
take everything into account equally.
Right. And even the police officers that would testify for the state of Minnesota against Mr. Chauvin, you would again have difficulty potentially believing their testimony.
Yes.
And that's because they work for the Minneapolis Police Department?
Yes.
And you believe that their testimony may be an effort to cover something up?
Yes.
more or less.
Yeah.
Any further questions?
Any questions from the state?
Yes.
Okay.
Good afternoon, juror number 113. Just on that issue, you're indicating that's how you feel now, that you may have a tendency to disbelieve law enforcement officers because they're law enforcement officers. Is that what you're saying?
Kind of. I'd say it's more because of the case itself, and I guess I would be more cautious in believing those involved with the defendant. Or yeah.
Because that's a little different than not believing someone because they're a police officer. And so
Yeah.
I just want to break that down. Is it that you would examine those witnesses for potential bias because they have a connection to the defendant?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's if I'm understanding what you're saying, it's not that you would necessarily disbelieve a police officer because they're a police officer, but anyone who had some sort of connection to the defendant, you might scrutinize their testimony more closely
Yes.
because there could be a potential bias.
Yeah.
You understand that that could be the case with any witness. Any witness could have a bias.
Yes.
And if the judge instructed you that there are certain things that you need to consider with any witness who testifies, including, potential bias, a connection, some sort of motive to lie, would you be able to set aside any preconceived ideas you have today, follow the judge's instructions regarding how to evaluate all witnesses?
I believe so, yes.
And it's very important because, as you know, this is a very important case. It's important to the defendant. It's important to the state. And so when you say, I believe so, I need to know if you really know that you can do that. Would you be able to follow the court's instructions and evaluate each witness who testified on their own merits in accordance with the judge's instructions?
Yes.
And you're confident you could do that?
There's like 5% that's not, but 95%.
Well,
so that's
if I
not-
were, use this example, if you were my pilot and I'm getting on a plane,
Yeah.
and you said, "Don't worry, Mr. Slisher, I am 95% sure that I'm going to land this plane safely," I
Yeah.
might wait for another pilot.
Yeah.
Right? And so, and again, you can only answer based on what you know. Nobody knows yourself better than you.
Yeah.
The question is, would you be able to follow the judge's instructions and evaluate each witness independently, or would you have some reservation?
I suppose I may have some reservation with that.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your answers to the questions. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
Juror 113, I'm going to excuse you from this panel, so you are actually excused from all jury service, so that you don't have to worry about being called up on another case.
All right.
Deputy will take some paperwork from you on the way out. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
You bet. We'll mark that as a challenge for cause by the defense that was granted. Correct, Mr. Nelson? All right. Well, that's it for the jurors for the day. I think we're going to try and pick two more so that we definitely have 14 come Monday, March 29th. We'll schedule 5 and 3 for Monday. And of course, if we get the ones we need by the end of the day, we're all set to roll. All right, but still, our starting date is going to be March 29th. Anything else for the record? All right. All right, thank you. We're in recess until, 8:30, 9 a.m. on Monday. Yeah.